Hey guys, so I wanted to do a character tutorial in Unity 5, just covering kind of the first few bits to get you kind of up and running with a character in a scene that you could kind of then create a game around. So I'm going to do it in 4 separate videos. The first one covering the character input and character controls for basic movement. Then the second covering the third person camera, a third one covering the first person camera and the ability to switch your point of view, and then finally something on some kind of shader effect for the main camera as well. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching. Okay guys, so as you can see I've started setting up a scene already, just with some basic boxes for walls that I've layered and labelled as walls. That's going to be quite important later, so it's worthwhile doing. This first section, getting a character in and animated and basically moving around, we're going to run through pretty quickly, just to make sure that we can get to some of the good stuff later on in the same video. So to start with, I've gone to Mixamo and grabbed these characters and these animations, so I'm just going to drop the main T-pose character into character. That's going to load all of his armature and his materials and stuff in, and then these are his animations, which I'll drop into there. Okay, so that's everything we need, and the character itself then can just be dragged and dropped straight onto the screen. Now there's a few things he needs. He needs a capsule collider, so we may as well add all of these now. This will need changing slightly, so it needs to cover kind of all of his body. My character is about 1.8 high, so I need it to be in his middle at 1.8, and I need it to come out to about his shoulders, which for my character is about 0.27. If you can see that there, that's kind of how you want it for pretty much all of your characters. It also needs a rigid body, and we want to freeze the rotation on the X, Y and Z just to stop him tipping over. And at the moment that's pretty much all the character needs to get going. His animations, at the moment they come in from Mixamo not looped, so we'll just need to make sure that we loop all of these animations to make sure that it's a continual movement. If you do ever want to see them and it's not showing, you can just kind of drag your model down and it'll fix it for all of them. And the character itself from Mixamo comes with an animator component, but it doesn't come with a controller. So if we add a controller in, animator controller, I'm just going to call mine anim. We go into there, we're going to want to start with a new state sub-state machine rather. And we're just going to call ours locomotion. That seems to be the sort of standard for any movement. If we were going to add any more, because it's state machine, we'd add them here. So any sort of jumping or attacking would come off this, so it could only be in one at a time. For the moment though, we're just going to sit in locomotion, and we're just going to have those 3 animations. So we're just going to set a blend tree. That blend tree is going to be our default state, so it's going to come straight to the blend tree, and we are going to add the 3 motion fields that we've got, and we're going to drop those straight in. So I've got my idle, I've got my walking forward, missed it then, my walking forward, and I've got my jogging forward, and I'm going to want to override the thresholds. Because I've only got 1 key, so my key is either going to be 0 or pressed is going to be 1. So if I left it where it was, it would go straight from idle to jog. Here, this will sit with anything greater than 0.5, and then this will sort out later in the code as a press to jog forward. So that is basically our animation done. If we go back to the scene and to our SWAT guy and we add that anim controller to our component, when we run now, it should sit nicely in a looped idle pose, which looks kind of nice. But we should really get him moving. So to do that, we're going to need a couple of scripts. Those scripts we'll add both of them in now, I guess. They are going to be the character controller. So that's going to handle the actual controlling of the character, but we also need a third person inputs script as well. So this is going to handle what we plug in, and the other one is going to handle what happens to it with the actual character. Okay, cool. So we've got both of them open. Now I'm kind of going to fly through a lot of this code. It's fairly straightforward, especially with things like variables. If you need to pause the video to see which variables we're using, feel free to go for it. But we're going to take the basic input variables, which are going from Unity's default, horizontal and vertical. You can grab hold of these if you ever need to change them by going into project settings and inputs. They're all kind of in here. But we don't need to worry about that. It's basically just the up and down keys and the WASD keys. And we're hard coding a sprint key. So that's fine. We'll also need visibility of the character controller script. And then from there, we're just going to want to go straight into our start function. And our start function is pretty much just going to be a case of getting the rest of the components from our character. Which is all going to happen in our character controller script. So if we bounce over to the character controller script now, we can get rid of the existing functions. We'll overtype those in a second anyway. We'll just drop all of our variables in. Let's just grab hold of these. There we go. Okay. So we'll drop all of our variables in. There's a few, but they're all pretty straightforward. So we've got a vector2 to handle the input from our x and z axes. And then just some basic variables for locomotion, different running speeds, am I sprinting or not, some target directions and rotations, so vector 3s and quaternions, and then our components, which is the thing that we came in here for. So to grab our components, is going to be our get components function, which again pretty straightforward. The rigid body becomes the rigid body, capsule glider and animator. So that's all okay. Let's remove that as well so we don't get ourselves confused. So back in the third person, these are all actually going to update from a late update rather than an update function. So we're just going to make sure that the input handling all happens after everything else has happened. So we don't want it trying to grab inputs while it's still trying to move our character. We want to finish everything first. So the input handle is going to run that, and that input handle is going to consist of these three scripts. That's not actually a null at the moment. We'll come to that. The input handle for these three scripts, again, it's all fairly straightforward. I've tried to compartmentalize these as much as possible, so if you do need to go into them later, it makes life a lot easier. But we'll start from the top and work down. So the move character component is just going to be populating that vector2 that we saw from earlier on in the character controller script, and the sprint input function is just going to be listening for that key down on the sprint input key that we hard coded, and then it's going to run a function in character controller to change that is boolean value to true or false, depending on which way the key is. The only other thing that we'll actually need to run in here is an update per frame, and that's actually going to update the motor skills or all of the functions within the character controller a bit later on. But let's start from the top down and write these functions out in the character controller so we can see exactly what they're doing. So to start with, the update target direction, again at this stage very straightforward. It's only a single line at this point. Let's just grab that from in here and pop it in there for you. So the update target direction is literally just going to change this variable to the vector3 taking in the input x and y from our controls. Okay, so pretty straightforward. What was the other one that was in here? The sprint and then the update motor. Okay, so the sprint is quite literally just listening for that key and then changing the Boolean value. So that's just going to update that Boolean value that we kept up in our variables. And the final one, the update motor that sits in there, this is actually just going to update our animations that we've sorted out. So the float that's inside the animator actually defaults to something else. Let's just go back into that very quickly. Defaults to blend. It's called blend. We don't actually want it to be called blend, because that's, if you end up with more than one blend tree, it's going to get really confusing. So I'm actually going to change that to movement input, so that it actually makes a little bit more sense. And then in here we're setting that float of movement input to our character's speed. Okay, perfect. So we've got everything in our input. We've got everything in our character controller. My apologies, the update motor is the update animator is called by the update motor. The update motor actually does a little bit more than just update the animator. The update motor actually calls the free movement as well. The free movement, we're not doing check ground at the moment. The free movement basically deals with the actual movement of the character, which is a slightly bigger function, but again, nothing too difficult at this stage, and pretty much the only thing left to go in at this point. So if we drop that in, and we'll go through it very briefly, and then we should have a moving character. So this is our free movement function. First off, we set our speed to a total sum of our inputs, and we clamp it to 0. So we only want to ever be running with a set speed between 1 and 0. We add on the 0.5 if we're sprinting, and then we check to see if we're actually trying to do anything before we try and start moving. If we are, and there is an input value in the target direction that we set earlier has a magnitude, we're going to update our target direction below. And if there's a difference in rotation between where we're trying to go and where we currently are, we're going to move on to actually set our new Euler angle to the free rotation angle, which is the difference between our look rotation and our transform up. Once that's done, we're going to set the Euler angle to a full Euler angle, including our transforms. So the only thing we want to change is our Y. And then we're just going to spin on that. So we're going to lerp between our current rotation and that new Euler angle. After that, we're going to actually deal with actually moving. So this is our rotation, this is our movement. The movement is just going to take the velocity depending on this Boolean value and these variables that we set earlier. It's going to multiply that out by our forwards, so we're always running head first. We're not strafing or running backwards in this instance. And then we're just going to apply that vector 3 to our rigid body's velocity, and we're going to add a force in that direction too. I think I may have missed a bracket just in there. Okay, perfect. Right, so let's save this down. That should be everything we need ran through very quickly to get a character moving. So if we go back into our Unity and we attach these scripts to our character, when we, oh, my apologies, stop playing first. Attach the scripts to the character. When we press play, we should have movement. Okay, so I can move around basically, and if I press the shift key, I start to run. Okay, perfect. So we've got movement. What we need now is to move on and actually get some camera control in here. The camera's not moving, I'm really far away. So let's move on to some camera control.